Growing up with the Wii, there weren't really a whole lot of 3D platformers available to choose from. Of course, there were the masterpieces that are Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, and there's a few other games like Epic Mickey, Sonic Colors, Ratatouille, which comes with a free ticket to see the movie by the way, and I could never forget Ninja Bread Man. But there was also one colorful round guy who had two fantastic games on the Wii that played a huge role in turning me into a fan of 3D platformers in general. I played the first one before even Mario Galaxy, so technically it was my introduction to this genre, although it's a bit unconventional in terms of its gameplay. And I played the sequel a lot as well when it came out. These games were full of positive energy and vibrant creativity, and I've been wanting to replay them for a while now as I have tons of fond memories of my time with them from back when I was a kid. So hello and welcome back to Nostalgia Rewind, the series where I take a look back at some of the games I feel most nostalgic for and see how they hold up now. Today's game is Blob. Oh, and the second one too. Blob started out as a student project at a college in the Netherlands, and THQ later acquired the rights to the game and got Blue Tongue Entertainment to develop it into a full video game. It was released in 2008 on the Wii, and the second game released in 2011 on the Wii, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3, with a DS version coming out at the same time that had very different gameplay. Blob is actually a different color on the box arts for the different platforms, which I've always thought was a cool detail. Although it's kind of funny that he was blue for Nintendo and red for PlayStation. I was originally planning on playing through the Wii versions of both of these games, but it only took a few minutes of playing the original to remind me what this game's biggest problem is. You have to shake the Wii remote every time you want to jump. In a platformer. I mean look, I'm a fan of motion controls in general, but jumping is the most important input in the entire game, so not mapping it to a button was a pretty bad move. But luckily I found a solution to this problem. Alright, there we go. And I know the sequel got rid of the motion control jumping on Wii, but I might as well play the newer port of that one as well so the graphics will be all nice and shiny. The ports of these games are pretty solid all around, although some of the UI elements in the first game are strangely small and hard to read at times. And sadly you can't draw all over the title screen with the Wii remote anymore. The main thing that I and many others remember the most about these games is the music, as both games have absolutely fantastic soundtracks. They also have really funny and clever cutscenes that are super well made and genuinely made me laugh multiple times. So I'll be using some of my favorite moments from the cutscenes as transitions throughout the video to let them speak for themselves. And without any further ado, let's dive into talking about the first game. In Blob, you play as, well, Blob. He's a colorful ball of energy with a rebellious attitude that's Chroma City's last hope of escaping the evil rule of Comrade Black and his army of Inkies. Together with a resistance group known as the Color Underground, you slowly take back the city and restore color to this black and white world. It's a simple setup, but it's still pretty effective, and it feels great to lead a revolution against the often hilariously mundane world that Comrade Black has created. Think of those signs that outlaw loud music or skateboarding and you've pretty much got a good idea of what you're fighting against in this game. Blob's gameplay is pretty unique, where the levels start out as bland, colorless landscapes and it's your job to bring color and joy back to all the buildings around you, freeing the trapped citizens stuck inside. Each time you paint a building or part of the environment, an extra bit of instrumentation is added into the song that's playing. And what's really impressive is that each color is associated with a different musical instrument, like red being a saxophone or blue being an electric guitar. This adds so much to the experience, making it feel like you're adding to the music yourself with your platforming, which feels super cool. But it doesn't stop there, as every song has a different set of instruments assigned to the colors, so each new level has its own unique feel to the music and color-based platforming. This is a genius gameplay idea that makes the music feel so much more engaging and interesting, and it brings a sense of life and energy to each of the colors. I ran into a glitch where the music stopped playing for a bit, and pretty much all of the fun was sucked out of the gameplay. This really highlighted just how important the soundtrack is to this game, as it isn't nearly as fun without its terrific jazzy tunes keeping you company as you play. John Guscott knocked it out of the park with his work on this music, and both this game and the second one's soundtracks are seriously some of my all-time favorites. You can choose between Blob's moods before going into a level, which changes the music that plays. As a kid, I would exclusively choose Unstoppable, but it turns out that pretty much all of the songs are really great, and the final level locking you into one song was a nice touch that made the stakes feel higher for some reason. Blob's heavy movement takes a while to get used to, but once I got it down, he actually feels pretty good to control. You attack by targeting something and then slamming into it with the jump button, which feels really satisfying to pull off. You'll have to mix and match colors by slamming into paint bots to get the right color for the job, which adds in some nice puzzle-type moments. The targeting can be a bit finicky at times, as the game puts higher priority on certain objects over others. But for the most part, it worked really well, and targeting helps speed up the way gameplay feels since Blob moves pretty slowly on his own. Blob's wall jump felt really weird at first, but I actually grew to really like the way he launches off of a wall, and it was a particularly fun move to use in creative ways later on. He can get awkwardly stuck in places at times, but after a few hours with the game I learned how to avoid those situations altogether. In general, the game isn't super focused on platforming though. Instead, you're tasked with completing different objectives that are given to you by the members of the Color Underground throughout the level. These objectives range from taking down inkies to coloring buildings in a specific way, with bigger landmark transformations being the most important ones. And while these tasks can be fairly repetitive, I never got annoyed by them. It's probably because of how charming all the different characters are, as reading their dialogue and watching their well-made animations never got old for me. While I didn't mind the focus on objectives, I wasn't a huge fan of how often the game stops you playing to show you cutscenes of fairly mundane stuff. You unlock gates and transformation power-ups the more you paint, which is a great idea, but it often meant that the game would stop and show me that I've unlocked a gate all the way at the end of a level while I was still in the starting area since I'm an obsessive painter. If I had one big critique of this game, this is it. Thankfully, you can skip the cutscenes, but it doesn't solve how jarring it can feel when the game keeps interrupting you to give you information that really isn't that important. But I get that it's hard to design something that's approachable for kids, but also enjoyable for weird adults like me who enjoy colorful 3D platformers. So the best solution would just be an option in the settings to turn off the less important cutscenes. The levels are pretty long, usually taking me between 40 and 50 minutes to beat each one. I don't mind this setup, as it makes each level really memorable and it feels great to go back through the level after you've painted everything and see how much of a difference you've made. The level setup actually reminds me quite a bit of another game I love, Hi-Fi Rush. Each stage feels like one huge location that are important parts of the city as a whole. Of course, there are plenty of collectibles to find, from style pickups that change the pattern on the buildings you paint, to making sure you paint every billboard around the level. For some reason, levels also have a time limit, which always stressed me out as a kid, but really it doesn't matter at all. I played at a pretty relaxed pace most of the time, and routinely had well over 30 minutes left on the clock by the time I reached the end. I'm not saying I think the time limit should be more strict, as that would take a lot of the fun out of the gameplay. I'm just not sure why it's here at all, aside from giving you another collectible to gather while playing. Each level also comes with 2 side challenges to complete, which are like little mini levels focused on getting to the end as quickly as possible. I never really played these when I was younger, which is a shame as they're actually a ton of fun. It shows how much potential Blob's moveset has for quickly jumping around stages in a way that the main levels never really demand from you. The Blob's gameplay works surprisingly well in this context, and I wish these side levels would have made a return in the sequel. Overall, this game has such a great sense of identity. with the plot focused on fighting back against a cartoonishly evil dictator by playing loud music and throwing color around. Playing as Blob kind of made me feel like I was an agent of nature, returning balance to the world by taking out sources of corruption and pollution. And I love that you can see the color return to the world on the level select screen as you play through the game. Between the amazing music and the colorful visual style, I think playing this game as a kid is a big part of why I ended up being such a huge fan of Splatoon, as the two franchises are very similar in a lot of ways. But saying the Blob was just fuel for my eventual love of Splatoon is a disservice to how great this game is on its own merits, and it absolutely still holds up today if you're willing to take the time to learn how it plays. Some parts of the recent ports can feel a bit awkward without motion controls, like just repeatedly pressing one button to change landmarks, but it still beats shaking my arm every time I want to jump. Plus, the lights on the DualSense controller change to match whatever color Blob currently is, which is a super cool detail that took me forever to notice. The final battle against Comrade Black is an awesome spectacle, and painting under pressure is something I wish the game did more of. The Blob did the whole colorful finale in space way before Splatoon did, and it's a great way to end the game. The first Blob might not be quite as polished as the second one, but it's still a game I absolutely love because of its personality and charm. I enjoyed revisiting this game as an adult even more than I thought I would. It's the sort of game you can just chill out with, and enjoy running around the levels bringing color back to the world. I never played Blob 2 as much as I played the original, and I was skeptical going into it that it would be able to live up to my expectations. But thankfully it managed to be everything I wanted it to be and more. Blob 2 is an almost perfect sequel, taking everything great about the original game and expanding on it while cutting out a lot of the stuff that didn't work. It keeps the same core gameplay that worked so well in the first one, but changes it up in ways that really impressed me. There are some really small changes, like paintbots needing to be slammed to avoid accidentally rolling over one and changing Blob's color when you don't want to, and way fewer interruptions to the gameplay overall. I was a little scared at first that they removed Blob's wall jump, but now you just have to hold down the jump button to activate it, which helps make the controls feel a lot better. I'd say the two biggest positive changes are removing the time limit at the end of levels and the new 2D platforming segments. Once you get to the end of a level, the time limit goes away and a whole bunch of side activities open up, and you can explore and paint at your own pace. This is a fantastic idea because it lets you go back and grab any collectibles you might have missed without having to worry about your time running out. It also lets you focus on the main quests at first since you always know you can come back at the end of the level. The side quest type objectives that open up are great too, and they help flesh out the residents of the world. This is a perfect solution to the criticism of the time limit in the original that lets the developers keep their vision intact while also rewarding you with the freedom to do what you want at the end. And now when you're transforming big landmark locations, you actually go inside them for a short 2D platforming section, which is a nice way to change up the pace of the gameplay and challenge you in unique ways. I really enjoyed these parts of the game, even though I don't know if I'm fully on board with the way Blob activates switches during these sections. This game also has some new ideas like power-ups for Blob, and fun platforming stuff like gravity walls. It's the core to Blob formula but expanded and refined, with all the old characters returning alongside your new companion robot, Pinky. The story and cutscenes are darker this time around, with plotlines involving corrupt elections, evil brainwashing cults, and all of your teammates getting captured and tortured. Well, as much torture as the E10 Plus rating will allow. I'd say the story is a little less funny than the first game because of all of this, but it still has plenty of humorous moments that keep the tone pretty light. The cutscenes do a great job at explaining mechanics without any dialogue, while also still being funny, and I love how brutal they can be when showing Inky's dying in hilarious ways. Probably the thing that was most surprising to me is that the music is somehow even better than the first. Every single one of these songs are absolute bangers, with the same extra color-based instrumentation that plays as you paint stuff. The soundtrack is a huge reason why I enjoy playing these games so much, so I was very happy to find out that Blob 2 knocks it out of the park in that area. There are plenty of new enemies to fight against, with many of them being much more difficult than anything that was in the original. I really enjoyed the challenge, and it forced me to approach combat in a different way. The elite inkies that change colors are just plain annoying though, as the best strategy is just to sit there and wait for them to change to the color you currently are rather than track down a whole bunch of paint bots. There's also the power-ups I mentioned earlier that can give you the advantage, by giving you unlimited charges, constantly regenerating your health, turning you into a metal wrecking ball that can also climb up walls in the 2D segments, and the amazing supernova ability that always feels really cool to use. You can also upgrade Blob space stats as you collect inspiration pickups, which is a nice way to add some light progression elements to the game. All these extra features make the game a lot more engaging overall, and I found myself spending a lot longer in the stages than I had to because I was having such a good time. I was already obsessed with painting everything in the original, and now it's easier than ever to track down everything you missed in a level. Pinky will even give you extra rewards for painting everything, and there were a few times when I'd already done everything she wanted before even talking to her. I thought she would be impressed, but she just called me a freak. Not every single problem has been fixed though, as the targeting can still be pretty annoying at times. It might be on me as I'm fairly impatient during combat, but there were a couple times where Blob targeted the wrong thing and messed me up pretty badly. The solution is probably just to slow down and make sure you're targeting the right thing before attacking, but that does affect the flow of gameplay a bit. The level design was just as great as the first games, and even better in a couple places. But there was one level that I really didn't enjoy at all. The factory one that takes place almost entirely indoors in segmented areas with the camera feeling even more strict than usual. I was worried the rest of the game would be like this, but thankfully the levels after that one went right back to being really great. And in the final level, Blob 2 evolves into its true form, Super Mario Galaxy 3. The final space level felt super climactic, especially with Comrade Black testing your patience by taunting you with optional objectives to save innocent civilians. They really ramped up his personal hatred for Blob, which made him a much better villain, and the way he breaks the fourth wall by instructing you to turn towards open space and jump to your death, or to pause the game and just quit now was really great. The first game's final boss was simple but fun, and unfortunately I liked this final boss a bit less. There's an earlier fight against a big ink monster that's very similar, and they're both not very impressive. Boss fights clearly aren't a strong suit for this series, but they're far from terrible. Blob 2 is a terrific sequel that did pretty much everything I wanted it to do, and I'm surprised that it didn't do as well sales-wise compared to the first. I doubt that Blob was a big inspiration for the Nintendo team that made Splatoon, but they definitely do feel very similar, which makes me think that Blob deserved to find a bigger audience than it ended up with. They were either too early or too late depending on how you look at it, and I wish more people could have played these games. After playing through both Blob and Blob 2 over the past few weeks, I found a new level of respect and admiration for what they were able to accomplish without being huge AAA-funded projects. Whether you played these games as a kid or not, I definitely recommend going back and playing through them as they're really solid 3D platformers with a ton of personality. I didn't even talk about everything these games have to offer, like the multiplayer side modes of both games that are surprisingly solid. But I'm still trying to find a good balance between covering everything about a game and making videos short enough that I can more fully enjoy the process of making them. The Blob games absolutely still hold up to this day, and I think my opinion of them has actually gotten higher after revisiting them. These games have this infectious, super positive energy that I love. Of course, I would love to see a Blob 3 someday as I think this series still has a lot of potential, but I have no idea how likely that is. Either way, I'm very grateful for these games and the way they've created so many bright and colorful memories for me in my childhood, and how they still manage to bring me so much joy to this day.